There are so many groups of people that are unseen around the world that are just as important as anyone else. So why are they seen that way?
I'm not sure, but I definitely know it's not fair. Who are those people, and how can we change so they are seen as important?
Well, one group of people that has little to no light shed on them are the innocent people on death row and the people who are trying to change life quality for them.
I've heard about someone named Bryan Stevenson. Isn't he an advocate for the innocent people on death row?
Yes, Bryan Stevenson is a lawyer who has been representing defendants on death row since 1985. He also started a project called the Equal Justice Initiative, which has given hope to many that feel they will not have a way out of their complicated situation. They have done great work, which has resulted in 125 innocent people being exonerated.
Mr. Stevenson has always had a soft spot for those wrongly accused in the Deep South.
In 2012, he also argued against the Supreme Court, and he secured the landmark ruling that outlawed life without parole for children 17 and under.
Bryan Stevenson graduated from Harvard in 1985. Then later graduated from NYU School of Law in 1998.
Bryan Stevenson has always been a successful man, and he wanted to use his abilities to help others go through unfair situations.
So when he got these degrees and already had the passion for the people in the Deep South, he started representing capital defendants and death row prisoners in the Deep South because these people had even less of an advantage.
He seems like a really powerful person who has changed a lot of lives for the better. But what is the Equal Justice Initiative in more detail? I'm a little confused.
The Equal Justice Initiative, or EJI, is a private, nonprofit law organization that focuses on social justice and human rights in the context of criminal justice reform. To continue the thought of this project so it could access more people, he wrote a book called Just Mercy, which explains the Equal Justice Initiative and the injustice in the government system.
Oh, what started his passion for the injustice on death row?
Good question, Libby. He never agreed with the death penalty in all of his career as a lawyer, and when he saw that the United States Congress unlimited funding for the death row penalty defense, he decided to take it into his own hands and try to save as many people as possible on death row who were innocent.
Bryan Stevenson is an important man who positively impacted many others fighting for their lives on death row. Death row is a serious issue and has brought up problems because of the people who have been wrongly convicted and face the death penalty because of it. Bryan Stevenson and his Equal Justice Initiative has given hope to many people who feel hopeless and they will not have a way out.
One of the victims Bryan Stevenson saved was on death row for 30 years as an innocent man. His name is Anthony Ray Hinton.
Anthony Ray Hinton is a writer and activist who stands up for those who are also wrongly convicted just like him.
His story starts in 1985 when there were two restaurant workers, John Davidson and Thomas Wayne Vanson. They were both shot to death. Shortly after, there was another restaurant shooting, but this victim wasn't killed. Later on, the police decided that the killer was Mr. Hinton because the victim, who was only hurt, picked him out of a lineup of other men. There was never any hard evidence like fingerprints or DNA.
The only thing that they had in common was that the same gun was used at all three of these crime scenes, which was his mother's gun. This was not even true, and that he worked in a factory 15 miles away from the crime scene.
When he went to the court, the prosecutor said that Mr. Hinton was guilty just because of his race and appearance.
This was absolutely ridiculous because he fully passed his polygraph test.
Even under all the circumstances, he was sentenced to death at 29 years old and was put on death row for 29 years before gaining the help of Bryan Stevenson.
When Mr. Hinton met Bryan Stevenson for the first time, he said that God has sent me his best lawyer. So he asked him to run ballistics on the gun that the court said he used.
There were gun examiners, and they found out that all three crime scenes couldn't be matched to one gun.
The Equal Justice Initiative, or EJI's team of lawyers, found this out and begged the state to look over the evidence again to try to get this man out free.
The court finally took this into consideration. He was completely exonerated from all his charges. He walked out of Jefferson County Jail on April 3rd, 2015. The EJI and Bryan Stevenson did great work for this man, and I'm sure he will never forget them.
It's so sad that an innocent man was stuck in prison for 30 years because of racism. This is why Bryan Stevenson's work is so important, because sadly this situation is just too common.
There are so many aspects to this story, and it is a miracle what Mr. Stevenson did. Another victim that was put onto death row was named Herbert Richardson, and he is one of only 66 people in Alabama to be executed.
Herbert Richardson was born on February 16, 1946. Throughout Mr. Richardson's childhood, he was mentally and physically abused. This abuse led him to enlist in the military when he was just 18.
Soon after he was enlisted, he was deployed to fight in the Vietnam War. Mr. Richardson was deployed to an area with very heavy fighting, and it was a camp named Radcliffe.
On one of his platoon missions, they were attacked, which left only Mr. Richardson alive. During this attack, he was also knocked unconscious, which led him to having terrible headaches.
These headaches that Mr. Richardson experienced were so bad he tried to commit suicide multiple times. Despite this, Mr. Richardson still spent 7 more months fighting for our country.
In December 1966, he was discharged from the military and he returned home to New York disabled and traumatized.
That's such a sad story. He was neglected while he was fighting for our country?
That's not even the worst part. After his incident, Mr. Richardson continues to be neglected and discriminated against.
In New York, Mr. Richardson recovered from the war in a hospital for veterans. He also continued to have post-traumatic stress syndrome, which otherwise known as PTSD. He also continued to experience head pain from the attacks he experienced in the war.
It was a widely known fact that throughout the hospital, Mr. Richardson had very bad PTSD, and he was known to have outbursts where he shouted, "Incoming!" at random times throughout the day.
While in the veteran hospital, Mr. Richardson was being taken care of by a nurse that was from Danton, Alabama. Mr. Richardson and the nurse dated for a short time before she moved back to Alabama.
Mr. Richardson followed her to Alabama in hopes to rekindle the relationship they once had.
Mr. Richardson started creating a plan to win her love back.
Throughout this time, Mr. Richardson continued to struggle with his trauma and PTSD. He also continued not to receive the proper care for these conditions.
Mr. Richardson made a bomb to place on the nurse's porch.
His plan was to have the bomb go off and he would run in and save his love just as he had done in the war.
After he placed the bomb on the porch, he went across the street to wait, but then disaster struck. A young girl named Rana May stepped onto the porch and shook the bomb. The bomb exploded instantly and killing the little girl.
Watching this from across the street, Mr. Richardson stood there horrified, and this was not what he wanted to happen at all.
Soon after, Mr. Richardson was arrested and charged with capital murder.
The charge of capital murder requires a prosecution to prove if or if not the intention of the crime was to kill.
During the prosecution, the prosecutor painted Mr. Richardson as an outsider from New York, an evil person, and an intentional killer instead of the selfless person who fought for our country at war like he actually was.
In a racial basis towards Mr. Richardson, because of his race, the prosecutor removed all of the black jury members from the case, and he was tried by an all-white jury.
During the trial, none of Mr. Richardson's service nor his extreme PTSD was mentioned.
Throughout the trial, important pieces of evidence were left out to paint Mr. Richardson as a blood-hungry murderer.
Soon after, Herbert Richardson was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to the death penalty.
Just the beginning of Mr. Richardson's story shows how much African Americans were shown unequal treatment in the justice system.
Mr. Richardson spent 11 years on death row, and in July of 1989, the state set an execution date.
The date the state set was August 18th, 1989.
Soon after the execution date was set, Mr. Richardson found the EJI and contacted Bryan Stevenson.
Bryan and his team worked tirelessly for weeks trying to stall the execution.
Bryan Stevenson brought attention to the ineffectiveness of the trial lawyer that Mr. Richardson had been given, in the failure to present the background of trauma, mental illness, and PTSD.
The U.S. Supreme Court denied the request at 7 p.m. on the day that was set for his execution.
Mr. Stevenson went to visit Homeland Prison where Mr. Richardson was to spend his last few hours. Mr. Richardson told Mr. Steven that all day people had kept asking how they could help him. He also said that more people asked them what they could do in the last 14 hours of his life than during the years before when he had struggled with trauma and PTSD.
As Mr. Richardson was escorted to the chamber, the song "The Old Ragged Cross" was played as he was requested. This song is a hymn with some of the lyrics being, "Then he'll call me someday to my home far away, where his glory forever I'll share."
Mr. Richardson was executed on August 18, 1989, and he is a prime example of how injustice is shown to African Americans in the United States.
Victim Stevenson saved from death row was Walter McMillan. McMillan was unjustly accused of murdering Rhonda Ray Morrison in 1986.
This crime sends shockwaves throughout the community. The police had no leads on the case for 6 months.
What seemed to bring McMillan to the attention of the police was his well-known affair with a married white woman. The very public divorce between the woman and her husband soon went from McMillan having an affair to someone capable of murder.
The police also investigated a white male from another country, but he ultimately made a false statement and blamed McMillan for the murder of Miss Morrison, supposedly confirming the police's suspicions.
He was arrested by Monroe County Sheriff Tom Tate and eventually charged with capital murder.
The sheriff Tom Tate arranged for McMillan to be placed on death row before his trial when he hadn't even been convicted of a crime yet. McMillan spent 15 months in Alabama's torturous death row before he even had a trial.
McMillan was with his family 11 miles away from the dry cleaning store where Miss Morrison was murdered at the time of the crime.
There was dozens of African Americans who could testify to his innocence, but they were ignored. The nearly all-white jury convicted Mr. McMillan of capital murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment.
In Alabama, trial judges were authorized to override a jury's verdict and sentence McMillan to execution by electrocution.
McMillan was sent back to his cell on death row and ultimately spent 6 more years there.
In 1988, Bryan Stevenson met Walter McMillan and began working with him to provide him his innocence. As Bryan Stevenson and his team began investigating McMillan's case, he ended up finding so much evidence proving that he was in fact innocent.
They found evidence that the state's witness against Mr. McMillan had been forced, including tape recordings proving that the state's only eyewitness had been pressured to testify falsely at Mr. McMillan's trial.
The EJI presented this evidence to the court, but it took 6 years of hearings and appeals before the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals finally decided that McMillan's arrest was unconstitutional.
An investigation was ordered, and the Alabama Bureau of Investigation ultimately confirmed that the evidence provided by the EJI determined that McMillan was innocent, but prosecutors could decide what to do about this. As McMillan's case began to gain more of a following, many people did not know what to think about his case. Resistance to acknowledging McMillan's innocence was intense.
McMillan was then released in March of 1993, but the overwhelming evidence of innocence ultimately forced the state to agree to drop the charges.
McMillan was one of the first released on death row in the modern era. Today, more than 160 people who were on death row were proven to be innocent and released.
After McMillan's release in 1993, he worked hard to educate people about the death penalty, sharing his experience with other people across the country with a strong knowledge and advocacy for innocent death row victims, as well as thankfulness towards Bryan Stevenson and the rest of EJI. Bryan Stevenson did not only save wrong-convicted men, but also women.
One of the women he saved off death row was Diane Jones.
Diane Jones had previously gone to prison for 1 year for forging checks to buy groceries, so this wasn't her first time around the block.
After this conviction, she completely changed her lifestyle, and for the next 17 years, she would continue to be a single mother and never get into any legal trouble ever again.
In November 1997, she moved out of her home to care for her deathly ill father.
She trusted her ex-boyfriend, Ronnie Cook, to watch the house while she was gone.
Ronnie Hook had already been under watch by the government for potential drug charges.
In December of the same year, she went back to the house to pick up some things she had left there. When she was there, narcotics government personnel came to the house because they had a warrant for Cook.
There were drugs found in the home when the police officers entered. Cook wasn't in the residence at the time. When the police officers came in, Jones was held at gunpoint and was arrested for drug trafficking, even though she hadn't been in the house for months because she's taking care of her father.
Where am I? Okay. Her trial was in October of 2000, and she had attorneys who also represented Cook. These attorneys' specialty was specifically drug charges, so Jones thought this would be a perfect fit for their convictions.
For their defense, they decided that they were going to have Cook admit to the jury that the drugs were his, and since Jones had not lived in the house for months prior, there was no way that the drugs could have been hers.
This approach didn't work because if they put Cook up on the stand, they would have to prosecute him too, which didn't help Jones' situation. Jones' attorneys ended up taking Cook's side more in the situation, even though they were also Jones' attorneys.
On the other hand, Cook was prosecuted separately and was found guilty of his own separate drug charges. He spent 8 years in prison for these charges.
Because Jones's attorney had pretty much abandoned her, she didn't have a defense, which resulted in her being sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole.
Jones had such a long and harsh sentence because of Alabama's Habitual Felony Offender Act. In the time of this case, all severe cases were sent through this act, whether it was violent or a non-violent offense.
Remember when I said that she went to prison for forging checks?
Yeah, but she was a perfect law-abiding citizen after that.
This is true, but the court didn't forget that she did this, so this automatically made her have to have a life sentence without parole because of Alabama's Habitual Felony Offender Act.
Jones knew that this was unfair and was looking for something or someone that would be able to save her from being stuck in prison for the rest of her life for something she didn't even do.
This is when she found EJI and Bryan Stevenson. She found them just in time because only a week from now, she would no longer be allowed to take her case to court.
The EJI had already been aware of the HFOA and the unfair death coming with it.
At the time, they couldn't do anything with the HFOA, but Bryan Stevenson still wanted to get Jones out because that was something he could do.
After 4 years of fighting for Jones to be free with the HFOA, he finally got them to reverse her conviction and give her a new trial. One thing about Bryan Stevenson is that he will never give up a fight.
When Jones got to the new trial, the court agreed that what the previous attorneys did was completely unfair and led to Jones not getting her full constitutional right to have defensive lawyers.
EJI and Jones continued to work side by side, and when she got her trial for appeal, EJI was right there with her. And on August 17, 2006, 6 years after she was put into prison for a crime she didn't commit, she walked out of the Jefferson County Circuit Court as a free woman. Jones was the first woman in Alabama to be released from Tutwiler Prison for women after being sentenced to life without parole.
She has used her freedom to continue to be a mom. She lives with her kids and mom in Birmingham, Alabama.
She went to school where she got a bachelor's degree in administrative office management. She got her degree back in September of 2012.
She continued to work with EJI to try to get a full pardon so she would be able to vote again. On September 27, 2017, she was issued that pardon and now has full voting rights back.
This one has done great things with her free life, and some see as that she never went to prison because she is so rehabilitated.
Having a woman going through this situation just proves that capital punishment doesn't only affect men, but also women.
Diane Jones is a great role model for many women in a similar situation, and it shows them to not give up even if you're wrongly convicted as a woman.
Women deserve the same treatment as men, and EJI does a great way of including everyone in changing anyone's life for the better.
These men and women were treated unfairly by the legal system, and this is why Bryan Stevenson's job is so important.
He takes cases of the people who are at the worst spot in their life and does what they can of getting them off of death row.
As you can see, it doesn't work out all the time, but when it does, lives can be saved and changed for the better.
Because he was saved from death row, Anthony Ray Hinton is now a writer and an activist who is helping to save other innocent people on death row.
Herbert Richardson was not one of the lucky ones that Bryan Stevenson was able to save, and he was executed on August 18th, 1989.
Walter was one more that Bryan Stevenson did miraculously save. He used his life as a free man to educate people about the death penalty, even though he was only alive a short time after he was released.
And lastly, Bryan Stevenson saved Diane Jones. With the help of Bryan Stevenson, she was able to walk out of jail free, and in 2017, she was fully pardoned and was granted the right to vote.
The work that Bryan Stevenson does reunites families and helps innocent people and saves lives.
The EJI helps the helpless, and Bryan Stevenson strives to help those who are wrongly convicted and who have fallen victim to those issues such as racial injustice, mental health bias, and much more.
Even though many of the victims saved by Bryan Stevenson were from Alabama, there are many other invitees being included in other states.
In Ohio, there is a similar project where people are being exonerated. Since 1976, 11 people have been exonerated in Ohio. In every 5 executions, there is one exonerated, which is making a lot of progress.
This group of people are called Ohioans to Stop Executions.
There are so many more victims that we didn't even get to cover, but the work that EJI is doing truly saves lives.
EJI has exonerated more than 3,175 people since 1989, and they exonerated 375 people through DNA evidence since 1989.
If EJI has done this much amazing work in the short time they have been an organization, can you imagine what's to come? So many more lives will be saved, and hopefully the rate of death penalties and innocent people will come down even further.
Working towards a new future is what everyone should aspire to. Following Bryan Stevenson's lead, people should strive to serve the underserved and help the helpless.
We believe that all in all, Bryan Stevenson was and continues to be a celebrated advocate for racial injustice on death row. We believe Bryan Stevenson reunites families and sees the unseen and wrongly convicted citizens as more than just victims of circumstance, but real people with real lives and people in need of saving.
We believe that the EJI will continue to advocate for those unable to advocate for themselves, while continuing to save many more lives from injustice exhibited by the government. Bryan Stevenson will continue to give back human rights to victims of injustice, allowing them to live out the rest of their lives in peace.
Bryan Stevenson sees the unseen, helps the helpless, and serves the underserved. We'll strive to help everyone around us like Bryan Stevenson has done.
For a new future!